Story 1. Actual conversation I had last week. I'll have a Coke. Waiter, is Pepsi okay? I'll have a margarita. Story 2. It's rare in my area of the Northeast USA. From what I've gathered, it's more prevalent in other regions. The only time it matters slightly is with the Diet Coke enthusiasts. These individuals are composed of 78.29% Diet Coke, and if any other beverage passes their lips, they may experience extreme reactions. Story 3. As a customer and observer in the southern United States, here is the typical conversation. Customer, I want a Coke to drink. Server, is Pepsi okay? Customer, do you have Dr. Pepper? If the answer to that question is yes, that's what the customer receives. Otherwise, the conversation continues with the customer eventually getting sweet tea or water. Story 4. My husband will not drink Pepsi. If he wants a Coke and all they have is Pepsi, he orders water or alcohol instead. Story 5. My father-in-law only drinks Coca-Cola and got tired of the "is Pepsi okay?" question. Knowing that most restaurants offer one or the other, he uses this response every time. Father-in-law, do you have Pepsi? Wait staff, yes. Father-in-law, I'll have water then. Story 6. Is Pepsi okay? Might as well be their tagline. We had a manager adjust the syrup flow on the soda bags, and they came down on him like a sack of wolves. He literally used a flathead screwdriver to adjust the flow and was caught the next day. Story 7. I'm indifferent to the brand of cola I drink. I don't care whether it's a well-known brand or not, as long as it's not one of those healthy or prebiotic options that taste like someone imagined cola while holding a seltzer. Story 8. When they offer me Pepsi, I will look my partner in the eye and loudly announce, I thought you said this was a nice place. Story 9. I worked at a place that carried Shasta products. Almost all of the time, people would decline if you mentioned it. Most of the servers just stopped informing customers that it was Shasta, and no one ever noticed. Story 10. I'm not a Pepsi guy. I typically drink Coke Zero, or if that's not available, Diet Coke. Why no Pepsi? For some reason, it gives me really strange dreams. A colleague I worked with mentioned that it gave him weird dreams. At the time, although I typically drank Coke, I thought he was imagining things. However, I decided to test it. For a week, I drank Diet Pepsi instead of Diet Coke, and throughout that week, I had strange dreams. I returned to Coke, and the dreams stopped. Occasionally, someone will inadvertently give me a Pepsi, and I'll have strange dreams again. If they don't have Coke products, I'll just get unsweetened iced tea. Story 11. I have served hundreds of thousands of customers in my former career in UK pubs and clubs. The number of people who cared could probably be counted on one hand. Story 12. Diet Pepsi is unpleasant. If they offer that, I will just switch to water, which I should have ordered in the first place. Pepsi Zero is enjoyable, but it is rarely offered. Story 13. Coca-Cola products for life. If I ordered a Coca-Cola and they offered only Pepsi products, I would take a Mountain Dew or 7-Up instead. Story 14. In Houston, when I ask for a Coke, the response I receive is, what kind? Here, Coke refers to soda. Story 15. The aspartame level in Diet Pepsi is higher, which gives me a headache. If Diet Cola isn't available, I order club soda or beer. Story 16. My father-in-law would start a lecture at the server if they didn't have Dr. Pepper or if they suggested an alternative. I stopped going out with them. Story 17. I took the Pepsi challenge in the 1990s and thought of myself as a Pepsi person for years. However, when I had my children, my cravings changed, and now I only like Coca-Cola. If offered Pepsi, I order iced tea instead. Story 18. I say no every time. I prefer Coca-Cola, and I only drink soda with meals occasionally, so it is easy for me to switch to water. Story 19. I only like Coke Zero. I despise Diet Coke. If Coke Zero isn't available, then I prefer Diet Pepsi or Diet Dr. Pepper. Story 20. I enjoy being the odd one out. I have never liked Coca-Cola. I can tolerate Pepsi. For me, it's always been, me Dr. Pepper, please. Then, is Mr. Pibb okay? Me so, do you have Sprite? Every so often, I'll get a Coca-Cola at McDonald's because it pairs perfectly with a Big Mac. Story 21. Pepsi drinkers might have a Coca-Cola. Rarely will a Coca-Cola drinker choose a Pepsi. A Diet Coca-Cola drinker may be aggressive, insisting you fetch them a Diet Coca-Cola from the nearest McDonald's if you wish to receive a tip. Story 22. My sun rises and sets with Diet Coke. I will riot if served Diet Pepsi. If it's a Pepsi place like Taco Bell, I will check to see if they have Sprecher Diet Root Beer. A lot of places do these days. If not, I'll settle for water. If I'm at a fast food restaurant like Taco Bell or Culver's, I will usually just take it to go so I can enjoy it at home with my Coke. Funny story about die-hard Coke drinkers. I used to be a waitress at a restaurant that served Pepsi products. I would bring in 3 cans of Diet Coke to drink throughout my shift. One evening, a table of 2 came in, and one of the gentlemen was not happy that it was a Pepsi place. Trying to commiserate with him, I told him I totally understood and that I brought in cans of Diet Coke to drink. He lit up. Long story short, he promised a $20 tip if I would give him one of my Cokes. Sold. Then I got into serious trouble, written up by management and told that if I ever did that again, I would be fired on the spot. No regrets. Solidarity, my brother. Story 23. If I order a cola and they only have a lemon lime soda, I drink water or avoid restaurants that serve that soda in the first place. Story 24. I'm pretty good in most restaurants because they all either have Dr. Pepper or Mr. Pibb. My standard order is a cheeseburger and French fries. Story 25. I do. If they don't have Coca-Cola, I just drink water. It isn't that I dislike Pepsi. I just don't often drink soda. If it isn't what I want, I'd rather drink water. Story 26. I am someone who changes my order. I do not like Pepsi and I only somewhat like Coke. If they have Pepsi, I will ask for a Dr. Pepper. Story 27. Not a restaurant worker, but my go-to beverage is usually cola. And if they don't have that, I choose lemon lime soda. I find the taste of Pepsi unappealing. I want my drink to have a strong sensation as it goes down. Story 28. We will have your finest bottle of RC Cola, imported from a haunted 1978 automotive repair shop vending machine. I will not entertain substitutes. Story 29. As a Coca-Cola drinker, there is no question more aggravating than, is Pepsi okay? Luckily, most servers now say, we serve Pepsi products. Story 30. I prefer Coke Zero but will accept Diet Dr. Pepper or Diet Coke if there are lemons or limes available. I actively avoid dining at places that only serve Pepsi and often choose other options because of it. Sometimes I have to endure it, such as when my kids want to stay at Excalibur in Las Vegas or when I really want Taco Bell. Story 31. UK perspective here. As others have mentioned, most people don't care, and some seem confused about why I even mention the difference since Coke is just slang for cola. However, on the off chance they change their order, it's usually to either a lime soda or elderflower presa. Additionally, I try not to ask if Pepsi is acceptable since it implies it's inferior. As a Pepsi drinker, I consider it superior. Story 32. Before Coca-Cola changed their formula to New Coke and then reverted to Classic Coke, there was a distinct flavor difference, more so than these days. If all they had were Pepsi products, I would order tea or Sierra Mist if the tea wasn't good. Story 33. It was never an issue, but I don't know if Pepsi changed their recipe because it tastes unpleasant now. Story 34. What do you want to drink? I will have a Coca-Cola. What kind of Coca-Cola? Dr. Pepper, please. Story 35. One time, shortly after we switched to Coca-Cola products, a dining guest ordered a crispy chicken sandwich and a Mountain Dew. After I offered Mellow Yellow, the customer simply drove away. Story 36. Not a restaurant worker, but my mom is an avid Diet Coke enthusiast. She will never drink Diet Pepsi or Diet Dr. Pepper. Nothing compares to Diet Coke. Her backup choice is root beer. Story 37. I prefer regular Pepsi and Coke, but I do not like Diet Coke. If only Diet Coke is available, I will choose something else. Story 38. I will never understand how people get past the fact that Diet Coke tastes like carbonated poison. I tasted it one time through a straw because I forgot which one was the diet version, and the taste lingered on my tongue for hours. Story 39. I was working at a property on the Strip that is contracted with Pepsi, and I would say about 35% of the time people would make unpleasant faces and decline. It is not that serious. Story 40. I occasionally get a negative response. If they still want something, they usually choose a neutral option like ginger ale or water. Story 41. A coworker of mine loved to tell the story of when he was asked that question at a restaurant. He told his server, "No, it's not okay." Apparently, the server went to a nearby grocery store, got a liter of Coke, and served it to him. If the story is true, I really hope he gave a fantastic tip. That is truly going above and beyond. Story 42. Most people would either say, "Yes, that's fine," or "I suppose." Occasionally, someone might say no and switch to root beer or something similar. Story 43. One time while visiting Chicago, I ordered a Diet Coke, and the waiter started the conversation off correctly per the script. I said, "No thanks, I'll have tea." He looked at me funny and brought hot water and a tea bag. I should have known something was wrong when he didn't know the next line in the script was sweet or unsweet. Story 44. If I want a Diet Coke but cannot get one, I usually ask for an Arnold Palmer with unsweetened tea. Story 45. In my country, if you ask for Coca-Cola and they are out, they will just fill it with Coca-Cola Zero, and I dislike Coca-Cola Zero. I can taste it and know the difference instantly, and I will definitely complain. Story 46. I always get a Dr. Pepper if Coke isn't available. This might be a regional preference, though. More often than not, Dr. Pepper is available when either Coke or Pepsi is not. Story 47. I'm a huge Coca-Cola drinker, and I'll take Dr. Pepper instead. I just can't stomach Pepsi at all. Story 48. My favorite is Diet Coke. Which restaurant serves Diet Coke on the tap? I have at least 3 people a night asking me this. Where are the restaurants that offer Diet Coke? Story 49. I only drink Pepsi. Coca-Cola makes me sick every time, and I believe Pepsi tastes better. My husband prefers the taste of Pepsi. We choose water over Coca-Cola. Soda is an occasional treat, and we won't waste the calories on Coca-Cola. Story 50. My brother-in-law only drank regular Pepsi. He refused all other types of Pepsi and any other soda brands. If Pepsi was unavailable, he would drink water. He was the same way with Budweiser. He wouldn't even drink Budweiser in bottles, only Budweiser in cans, Pepsi, or water. That was all he liked and all he would drink. Story 51. Maybe one for every 40 ordered. When they ask for a Sprite and I say, "Is Starry okay?" It's usually no. Story 52. I usually say I will have a Coke or Pepsi. I'm not very particular. Where I am particular is when it comes to diet drinks. I typically avoid diet options at restaurants and from fountain dispensers because I find them not carbonated enough. Story 53. In my country, Pepsi contains artificial sweeteners to which I am allergic, while Coca-Cola does not. Being served Pepsi instead of Coca-Cola or a similar beverage that I do not recognize will make me spit it out. Story 54. I used to do this. I only drink diet soda. Diet Pepsi was previously made with sucralose as the sweetener, while Diet Coke contains aspartame. I am not allergic to sucralose, but I have an extremely painful gastrointestinal reaction to it. It's as if my body perceives it as poison and tries to expel it as quickly and painfully as possible. If they told me it was Pepsi, I would order something else. Now Diet Pepsi has switched to aspartame, so I am safe now. Story 55. In Norway, the answer to that question is that we will take a Solo instead. It's like a better tasting Fanta from the same company that produces Pepsi here. It's nothing like a Coke, but it's much better than Pepsi. Story 56. A new Turkish restaurant opened near me last week. The menu listed Coke for $1, not specifying any products. My child ordered a Coke, but when it arrived, it was a can of Pepsi. We didn't mind, but I think some people might have been bothered. I just made a joke about the no Coke Pepsi situation. Story 57. Not a restaurant worker, but as a customer, I always say no to Pepsi if that's what's offered and yes to Coca-Cola. Typically, I just get water if I decline. Story 58. When I worked in a bar for a while, most people would accept the substitute while joking about it. Story 59. I once answered this by saying, "I'll have water then." The waitress stared at me and said, "Really?" "Yes, really." Story 60. I used to be a waiter. A customer came in and asked if we had Coca-Cola or Pepsi before placing his order. I told him we have Pepsi. He looked me in the eyes and said, "I'll take a Sierra Mist, please." Story 61. I don't think the concept of vice versa exists in this context. Asking for Pepsi is similar to telling someone to Bing something instead of Googling it. Even Pepsi drinkers must realize that most places aren't going to have it by default. They likely know deep down that Pepsi is inferior. Story 62. I prefer Pepsi products. If that's not available, I would choose either Dr. Pepper or Orange Fanta, and then Diet Coke if neither of those are available. Coca-Cola is too acidic for me. Story 63. Actual restaurant worker here. I have seen around a dozen people not take the alternative in over 20 years. Story 64. I worked at a place that switched from Coca-Cola to Pepsi. Almost nobody cared. However, there was one person who became angry about the change and said he would never buy from us again. I'm sure he was ordering from us again within a month. Story 65. I quit drinking soda decades ago. However, if they had Coke and not Pepsi, I would ask if they had real iced tea or the syrup version. If it was real, I would get that. If it was syrup, I would just drink water. Story 66. I only care because Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi are genuinely different sodas. If I don't care, I'll drink a Diet Pepsi, but generally, if there is no Diet Coke, I will get water. Story 67. My husband orders Coke Zero. If they have Pepsi Zero, that's great. If they only have diet options, he gets water. I usually order after him, so I already know what the options are and just order Coke, Pepsi Zero, or water as my first choice. Story 68. My restaurant switched from Coca-Cola to Pepsi a few months ago. I always inform customers when they ask for a Coke, and about 90% of the time they don't mind or ask for Dr. Pepper, which we don't have. The remaining 10% may switch to water, lemonade, or Starry. Story 69. My restaurant switched from Coca-Cola to Pepsi a few months ago. I always let customers know when they ask for a Coke, and I'd say 90% of the time they don't care, or they ask for Dr. Pepper, which we don't have. The other 10% might just switch to water, lemonade, or Starry. Story 70. My restaurant switched from Coca-Cola to Pepsi a few months ago. I always let customers know when they ask for a Coke, and I would say 90% of the time they don't care, or they ask for Dr. Pepper, which we don't have. The remaining 10% might just switch to water, lemonade, or Starry. Story 71. I am not a restaurant worker, but as a customer, I would say no. I dislike Pepsi and other cola drinks, only preferring Coca-Cola. I would opt for a different beverage or juice. Story 72. My teenage daughter, the person who dies of embarrassment if I do anything in public, will say, "I'll just have water then." Cringe. Story 73. I prefer Coke Zero, but since my blood sugar doesn't allow it, I usually opt for water or iced tea. My husband, however, doesn't mind any diet beverage. Story 74. I worked at Cracker Barrel. We sold Coca-Cola. If customers preferred Pepsi, I noticed many of them would switch to Sprite with no ice. Story 75. These individuals require examination, particularly those who become upset. In my experience, they accept no substitutes and may refrain from drinking anything at all, possibly only water. Story 76. I'm one of those who will simply bring you our cola, either Pepsi or Coke, depending on what we have, without asking. On the rare occasions when I do ask, they almost always order something different, usually iced tea, Dr. Pepper, or something alcoholic. Story 77. I'll share my experience. My previous job lasted 9 years and offered Pepsi products, which was quite annoying. Every time someone asked for a Coke, they acted as if I had offended them, which was stressful. I often felt anxious when someone requested a Coke due to their extreme reactions. I would think, "I'm sorry? I don't choose the products my company offers. What do you want me to do? Some responses included, I guess, or no water. To handle this better, I changed my phrasing to avoid making it sound like a question. Instead of asking, I would say, I'll take a Coke, then follow with, gotcha, it's Pepsi. What would you like? Speaking quickly seemed to prevent overly dramatic reactions, and this approach surprisingly worked. Here's a funny part. My coworker of many years would never correct anyone, allowing them to think they were getting Coke when it was actually Pepsi. Remarkably, only about 3 people a month even noticed the difference, or they simply chose not to mention it. People drank it without any concern. Story 78. I say no and just get water. If I'm going to be overcharged for a $3 to $5 soda, I want the real thing. Story 79. Honestly, the most common request we have right now is Coke Zero, which we don't have. Typically, people then go for regular soda. However, I have been in hospitality for years, and nobody has ever refused Pepsi or Coke after asking for the other. It's just flavored carbonated water. Personally, I prefer Coke. Story 80. When I start a table, I always say, we have Pepsi products. And there are many times during the night I will hear, I will have a Diet Coke. Story 81. 15 years ago, I worked in a Pepsi restaurant. Customers would change their orders several times over a busy weekend due to a lack of Coke. These same customers often complained that their cola was not bottomless or that the servings were too small. Story 82. My job recently switched to Pepsi, and after a sigh, they asked if we have Dr. Pepper or if they should decide on no drink. I never knew so many people disliked Pepsi. Story 83. My first choice is Coca-Cola no sugar, no caffeine. Next is Coca-Cola no sugar. After that, I prefer water. I do not like Diet Coca-Cola at all, and I find Pepsi in any form unpleasant. Story 84. I am in the minority who will be thrilled to hear they have Pepsi. If they have Coca-Cola products, I will choose a Sprite or Dr. Pepper. Story 85. Not a restaurant worker, but I am a person who will say no to Pepsi. I can't drink sugar-free sodas. They give me migraine headaches. When it comes to sodas, the Pepsi variants with sugar don't taste good enough to justify how unhealthy they are, so I just get water. Coca-Cola is like an addiction, though. I am too weak to resist. Story 86. I went into a bar and ordered a rum and Coke. The bartender asked if Pepsi was okay instead, so I said sure, no problem. He then said, right then, 1 Pepsi and Coke coming up. Story 87. Pepsi is not a replacement for Coke. The greatest moment this year, amidst all the political turmoil, is Costco announcing they are bringing Coke back. On that note, when I am eating out and discover that a place doesn't offer Coke products, I don't go back. It all depends on the type of food, of course. This applies to fast and casual dining. At a nicer restaurant, I tend not to drink soda anyway. Story 88. Not a restaurant worker, but I have been a customer in this situation before. I experienced a drop in blood pressure and needed sugar. I asked for a Coke, and when the employee asked if Pepsi was okay, I replied that any soft drink was fine as long as it contained sugar. Story 89. I used to drink a lot of Mountain Dew. It is available in about 30% of food places in my area. If they don't have it, I get Sprite, Starry, or other non-cola options. I only like cola in a rum and Coke. Story 90. I have some intolerance to Pepsi. I can drink a little now and then without issues, but too much too often causes stomach problems. I'm not sure what it is, especially since Pepsi and Coca-Cola are nearly the same, but it affects me. I appreciate it when they ask. If they have Pepsi, I order Dr. Pepper with a splash of lemon lime soda or tea. Story 91. Coca-Cola often turns into Mountain Dew or 7-Up. Mountain Dew often turns into Mellow Yellow or Sprite. Pepsi often turns into stewed prunes or water. Story 92. Generally, I understood that as more of a code word, rather than an order. Edit. Why don't you gentlemen have a Pepsi? Story 93. The most common question I receive when ordering a soft drink is that it is unavailable, and then I end up paying $4 for a cup of water with my combo meal. Story 94. Honestly, I just don't say anything. No one has ever pointed out the difference to me. Any place I worked at only offered Pepsi, so if a customer asked for a Coke, I would simply give them that. I only mention we only have Pepsi if they specifically ask. Whenever someone inquires about it, they usually just stick with the Pepsi anyway. Story 95. I often hear, "It's Pepsi, sorry." I don't know if it's local to me, but Pepsi is not very popular. Come to think of it, we have fewer chains that serve it. Is it Yum Brands that owns a bunch of chains? It must be Pepsi. But it could be just a coincidence. Every restaurant and bar has Coca-Cola. Even the few pubs that offer Pepsi on tap, likely due to a contractual obligation with the brewery, will have bottles of Coca-Cola. Story 96. We went to a hibachi restaurant last night, but we were trying to decide which one to choose. I looked at one of their menus, saw Diet Coke, and decided to go there. We ordered drinks, but they had changed to Pepsi. Noted. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.